They know about Martin Luther King. I have some very sad news for all of you, and that is that Martin Luther King was shot and was killed tonight in Memphis, Tennessee.
Welcome to the Brothers in Crime podcast.
We are brothers.
We talk about true crime.
We don't take ourselves too seriously.
And you shouldn't either. At 6:01 p.m., Martin Luther King Jr. was shot. Ray fled the rooming house, leaving his suitcase and rifle wrapped in a green blanket in the doorway of a nearby building that is called Canopy's Amusement Company. He's spotted by two patrons at Canopy's and by Charles Stevens and William Anschutz, residents of Bessie Brewer's rooming house. At 6:03 p.m., the shooting is radioed to police headquarters. Because remember, in addition to all the people who are there, in support of or frustrated that Dr. King is in town, either way, it required a police presence. And so police were there when this happened. It wasn't like, they were around. And a few minutes later, the owner of Canopy's Amusement Company informed police headquarters that a white man had run through the alley, dropped the bundle, fleeing the scene in a white Ford Mustang. Almost 15 minutes after the shooting, King, barely alive at this point, is rushed to St. Joseph's Hospital, accompanied by Abernathy and escorted by several police on motorcycles. Within 15 minutes of the shooting, the police dispatch includes a description of the possible shooter as a, quote, young white male, well-dressed, believed in late model white Mustang going north on Main from the scene of shooting.
Did they have the low jack activated?
I think it was turned off for some reason.
Oh, well, guess they'll have to track his iPhone.
Yeah, it's easy. Zuckerberg's got it. At 6:16 p.m., King arrived at St. Joseph's Hospital, barely clinging to life. Meanwhile, Ray's stuck in traffic along Highway 78, heading toward Mississippi. He's getting the heck out of town. At 6:30 p.m., police find Ray's abandoned bundle containing a rifle, those binoculars he purchased, clothing, the Commercial Appeal newspaper story that revealed King's location at the Lorraine, 2 beer cans, and Ray's radio. Police investigate the rooming house and identify John Willard in room 5B, who drives a white Ford Mustang. But by the time this is all figured out, a half hour after the shooting, Ray's already made his way into Mississippi. At 7:05 p.m., Dr. King is pronounced dead at St. Joseph's Hospital. Shortly after Dr. King was pronounced dead, his body is taken from St. Joseph's to Gaston Hospital, where an autopsy was performed by Dr. Jerry T. Francisco, the Shelby County medical examiner. He concluded that Dr. King's death was the result of a single gunshot wound to the chin and neck with a total transaction of the lower cervical and upper thoracic, spinal cord, and other structures of the neck. You want to put that into me people terms?
Yeah, that's an internal decapitation.
That's horrible.
Yeah.
At 8:15 p.m., the bundle that Ray left behind was handed over to the FBI. According to the report of the Select Committee on Assassinations of the U.S. House of Representatives, Dr. King was killed by a Remington Peters soft-point metal-jacketed bullet fired from a high-velocity .30-06 rifle. The committee determined that a rifle purchased by James Earl Ray on March 30th, 1968 in Birmingham, Alabama, and which was found in front of Canopy's Amusement Company at 424 South Main Street, moments after the assassination, as part of that bundle we talked about, was the type of rifle that could have fired the bullet that killed Dr. King. Memphis police broadcast their information, and the manhunt for King's assassin really began. Despite the proximity of Mississippi and Arkansas, the Memphis police broadcast failed to alert these other states to the alleged assassin. Man, I can't talk today. By this time, Ray has traveled into Alabama, where he emptied the Mustang of his belongings, dumping expensive film equipment into a ditch by the side of the road. The day after the shooting on April 5th, the manhunt really, really got underway because now we've expanded it beyond, Memphis and the borders of Tennessee. Ramsey Clark of the Justice Department and several FBI agents traveled to Memphis. The investigation will turn into the FBI's largest ever, costing over $2 million and involving more than 3,500 investigators. The FBI ends up tracing that rifle to the Air Marine Supply in Birmingham and finds the receipt was signed by a guy named Harvey Lohmeyer. Now, Ray drove to Atlanta on back roads and abandoned his white Mustang after wiping it clear of fingerprints. After retrieving a few things from his room at a flop house on Peachtree Street, and picking up his clothes from Piedmont Laundry, he got on a Greyhound bus headed for Detroit. The following day, he took a taxi across the Canadian border. On April 7th, President Johnson decreed that that day would be a day of national mourning and ordered flags to be flown at half-mast. The next day, on April 8th, the King's widow, Coretta Scott King, and dozens of national figures lead a peaceful memorial march through downtown Memphis in tribute to Dr. King and in support of the sanitation workers' strike for which King had originally been in Memphis in the first place. Now, remember, Ray has crossed into the Canadian wilderness, the great north, and while he's up there, he attempts to get a Canadian passport because his goal is to fly to Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe. That is a segregated country, and he sees it as a place of refuge where he will be protected and celebrated for his horrific act.
What a turd.
Yeah, I mean, that's you took it easy on him. On April 9th, Dr. King's funeral is held at Ebenezer Baptist Church. More than 50,000 people accompany a mule-drawn coffin through Atlanta to his resting place at Southview Cemetery. From the next few days, the evidence is left behind in Ray's bundle. The FBI believing the killing was a conspiracy. They start to think that maybe there's this conspiracy between three different men, Eric S. Galt, Harvey Lohmeyer, and John Willard. Because remember, somebody with the name John Willard was the one who checked into the hotel. Harvey Lohmeyer signed for this gun, and now we've got this Eric Galt guy. The FBI traces laundry tags on Ray's shirt and shorts to Home Service Laundry in Los Angeles. They tell him the name on the receipt is Eric Galt. They also trace a pair of pliers to Rompage Hardware 2 blocks from Home Service Laundry. So they got all these pieces of evidence, these different names that are connected to it. They're trying to sort it all out. And a week after the shooting, the FBI found a white Ford Mustang registered to Eric Galt in an Atlanta parking lot. Through a sticker on the Mustang's window, the FBI realized that the car was serviced in L.A. the previous February. The garage's records give the address for Ray's Serrano apartment in L.A. A further investigation into Eric Galt takes investigators to Birmingham, Alabama, where neighbors reveal that Galt took dancing lessons. This information, when coupled with the fact that Galt's Mustang was traced to L.A., led investigators to a photograph of Eric Starvo Galt, Eric S. Galt, at a dance studio in L.A. Finding Ray's old boarding house in Birmingham, the FBI gets even more information on the Mustang, and they locate and contact the car's previous owner. Now, Los Angeles post office records revealed that Galt moved from the Serrano apartment to St. Francis, and that he put in a change of address on March 17th for Atlanta. So they're putting all these pieces together. Then around April 12th, the FBI gets a photo of Eric Galt from the International School of Bartending. Investigators examine all the money orders recently purchased in LA and find one from Galt to the Locksmithing Institute. The FBI discovers that Ray completed his first locksmithing lesson in Montreal and a later lesson in Atlanta where a local address is listed. So they search this Galt's room in Atlanta, and the FBI finds an Atlanta map with pencil marking showing that he stalked King's movements. 4 places are circled on this map: Ebenezer Baptist Church, the SCLC headquarters, King's actual residence, and the Capitol Homes housing project. The map also provides detectives with a clear thumbprint. Now, on April 17th, the FBI issues a fugitive warrant for Eric S. Galt. They publish the bartending photo of Eric Galt, announcing that the man in the photo is wanted in connection with King's assassination. Investigators have begun to believe that one man, using various aliases, committed the murder. In fact, I think Hoover was even involved with the investigation at this point, and he orders the fingerprint comparisons to all known fugitives in the country, which at that time was a collection of over 53,000 prints. The next day, federal detectives began manually matching fingerprints because, this is the 60s, so we don't have what we have today. Around April 19th, the investigators, they got somewhere around the 700th fingerprint, and detectives found a match.
Ooh, let me guess. James Earl Ray?
Bingo, we got a winner. The FBI immediately distributes Ray's name and mugshot on posters around the country, announcing that Eric Starvo Galt is in fact Ray.
Finkel is Einhorn. Einhorn is Finkel.
As the great Jim Carrey once said, indeed. Investigators include both Mexican and Canadian authorities in the case, as the FBI has proof that Ray has visited both countries while he's been in the wind. By April 21st, authorities were appealing to the public for help. An ABC show called The FBI broadcasted a short appeal for public assistance in finding and capturing Ray. A few days later, Ray obtained that passport from Canada under the name of George Sneyd, I don't know, Sneyd, your pronunciation, dealer's choice, and purchased a round-trip ticket from Toronto to London. On May 6th, Ray flew to London and then exchanged his return ticket to Canada for a new ticket to Lisbon, Portugal. His ultimate destination, again, is at Rhodesia, Africa, which is what would become Zimbabwe in 1980. They observed no extradition treaty with the United States. On May 7th, Ray arrived in Portugal and learned that he'd missed a boat to Africa by only 2 days.
This fool missed a boat long before May 7th. His elevator ain't going to the top floor. The only thing he's good at is making up stupid names.
By the end of the first week of May, the FBI's trail had turned cold. And after more than a month of frustration, they considered microphone surveillance of Ray's siblings. He had a brother and sister. I mean, you know how the FBI was with surveillance. They're listening to you right now, Bob. And May 17th, Ray returned to London looking for another way into Rhodesia. With money running out, Ray wanted to Ray, and he planned to rob a jewelry store. So on May 27th, he attempted to rob Paddington Jewelry Store, but after encountering unexpected resistance from the owners, shocking, they didn't want him to rob their jewelry, he took off empty-handed. On June 1st, after looking at 175,000 passport applications, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, God bless them, found a match between the photograph of Eric Galt and an application for a George Raymond Sneyd. Investigators tracked the information on the passport to 962 Dundas Street, where Ray had used the alias Paul Bridgman before he left the country. Sneyd's passport was a key piece of evidence because it allowed investigators to then track Ray's movements from Toronto to London to Portugal and then back into London. The same day, the FBI released the name and updated list of aliases to airports around the world for the watch and detain list. Now, on June 4th, Ray attempted to rob the Trustee Savings Bank in Fulham, England. But he got startled when the teller accidentally kicked a metal box that produced a noise that sounded similar enough to a gunshot that it spooked him. He made off from the bank with 95 pounds, which was worth about $240, which I'm sure if you adjust that for inflation now, that's what, like 10 grand?
That'd be a lot of friggin' money.
Probably not 10 grand. I'm being a little crazy, but you get the idea.
A lot more than what it looks like in the 1960s money.
Yeah, like now you could buy 5 guys for you and a friend with $240. Back then, you could probably buy a car, maybe. All right, so then we get to June 8th. At Heathrow Airport, Ray attempted to buy a ticket on European Airways Flight 466 to Brussels. An immigration officer spots Ray's 2 passports and, concerned, finds Raymond George Sneyd on the watch and detain list. He is quickly arrested, and the FBI immediately begins the process for extradition. Speculation begins about whether he acted alone or was part of a conspiracy, and I'll give you room to talk about that in a minute, Bob, so just hang on. I see you chomping at the bit. June 11th, Ray protests extradition to the United States and requests F. Lee Bailey as his lawyer. Why not, right? The famous Boston trial attorney who had successfully defended accused murderers Sam Shepard and the Boston Strangler, Albert Salvo, and other notorious suspects. Bailey, unsurprisingly, refuses to take the case. June 27th, Ray attends his extradition hearing in London, and preliminary evidence is laid out against him. And then eventually on July 3rd, the United States is granted extradition. On July 8th, the journalist William Bradford Huey strikes a deal with Arthur J. Haynes Sr., an Alabama defense attorney, in which Huey will provide the money for Ray's defense in exchange for exclusive rights for a book. And then on July 19th, James Earl Ray is extradited back to Memphis, and he arrives in a bulletproof vest and some sort of special pants that are supposed to protect him from being shot and murdered as well. In November, he learns that his lawyer, Haynes, believes there is no chance for an acquittal, and Ray didn't like that, so he fired his lawyer. 2 days later, in an interview for Look magazine, Ray alleged that a fellow con man named Raoul was the perpetrator who actually assassinated Dr. King, and Ray was just a getaway driver. That kind of reminded me of the Kitty Genovese story whenever that Winston Mosley, was already it was all in for him, and he's like, oh, it was a mob hit, and I just drove the car.
Right.
So you fast forward to February of 1969. Ray has hired Percy Foreman as his lawyer. Foreman is this attorney from Texas who was famous for defending 778 accused murderers, and apparently he successfully acquitted 705 of them. But after, yeah, I know if that's true, I mean, that's what the legend is. If that's true, that's really impressive. But after listening to Ray for over 30 hours, Foreman tells him, dude, your case is hopeless. You ain't got a chance. And in response, Ray finally agrees to plead guilty. On March 10th, 1969, James Earl Ray pled guilty to murdering Martin Luther King Jr., and he was sentenced to 99 years in Brushy Mountain State Penitentiary in Tennessee. But that wouldn't last long. 3 days later, on March 13th, 1969, Ray recanted his plea, claiming that he was coerced into giving a guilty plea. And he got rid of Foreman as his attorney and began referring to him as Percy Fourflusher.
I think I could do better. I'm still kind of stuck on the fact that the guy that represented the Boston Strangler tells you, nah, man, hard pass. And the cat that's like 705 out of 768, which is amazing, is like, dude, you're screwed.
Like, you ain't got a chance.
Yeah, just like figure out what you want to say when you plead guilty, because this ain't going well. Anyway, I can't imagine, but did anybody even take James Earl Ray's conspiracy theories and whatever stuff seriously at all?
It's interesting. To an extent, yeah. And I think there are people today that would still argue. I mean, there's people argue about conspiracy theories for basically everything. I mean, some people think the earth is flat. So what are you going to do? He maintained his innocence for the rest of his life, and he did assert various conspiracy theories to try to explain Dr. King's assassination and either minimize or completely remove his involvement. For example, I mentioned that one of his stories was about a man he claimed he met in Montreal in 1967 who used the alias Raoul. That guy had, been the assassin and that he just was the getaway driver. He also asserted that he did, and I'm going to quote him here. He says he did not, quote, personally shoot Dr. King, but may have been, quote, partially responsible without knowing it.
Accidentally? What'd you do? You accidentally got him shot? I mean, come on, man. What does that even mean?
I have no idea. I really don't. There's been plenty of looks into these various theories. All of the official reporting says there was one shooter and he did it. It's not hard to believe that maybe there were others that this guy sought aid from or had some input or in some way or another helped him to commit this crime. I think that it's reasonable to think that that's a certainly possibility, right? But in terms of like hard evidence of that, there really hasn't been any hard evidence of anybody else being firmly involved.
I've said before, I'm not a big conspiracy theory guy. On the other hand, I don't trust nobody, especially the government. So to me, just kind of zooming out a little bit, you can't tell me that we lost 4 of the probably most influential leaders of our time in a 5-year span, and they were just all isolated incidents. It's just, that seems a little too fishy to me. You had John F. Kennedy in 1963. In 1965, you have Malcolm X. And then in 1968, you have MLK and Robert Kennedy. It just seems like a lot in 5 years to be isolated incidents.
Yeah, I don't know. I go back and forth because on the one hand, it's like, yeah, it seems like that's pretty crazy, and it's certainly easy to see where maybe there's some behind the scenes influence and action going on. I'm not so naive that I think that that's impossible or even unlikely. I mean, I think that makes sense. If for no other reason, there's certainly groups and organizations and currents of people who all wanted to see those leaders taken down. And it makes sense that they would try to, do things. And there were, I could see that. On the other hand, though, I think there is this tendency for us, right, when bad things happen, we don't want to believe that some whacked out ex-con army flunky can just go down to the hardware store and the gun shop and buy an old hunting rifle and can in an instant end a man as great as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was. It's hard to wrap our minds around the idea that it could be that easy.
It could be that easy. It's just all the circumstances around it that's maybe you call unrelated that just make it look fishy to me. Plus, the FBI wanted MLK dead. Hoover thought he was a communist and was like hey, we tapped your phones and house and everything else, and we found out all these things about your personal life, and it's going to come out, it's going to make you look horrible. So, best thing you can do is just kill yourself. I mean, I think the world of Martin Luther King, and, he's one of those people I would definitely love to meet and spend time with, if I can ever get Doc Brown to bring the DeLorean over here. But like the FBI director wants this guy dead, and he turns up dead.
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed out because, as I was researching this, I did think it was interesting that, knowing that history that we know now, and that's not like wild, crazy talk. I mean, it's documented, it's there, you can see it. To know that you had that going on and then, the FBI is responsible for figuring it out. And, they supposedly spent more money on this investigation than any other investigation up to that point and spent all this time and effort doing it. It's interesting, if nothing else, right? That the organization that wanted him to just off himself turns around and is charged with figuring out who murdered him.
Right. I think that's what you lawyer people call at least the appearance of impropriety.
That's fair.
Which is like saying, I'm not saying you're a dirtbag, but some people could say it kind of looks like that. Well, I'll flat out say Hoover was a dirtbag. He's a bag of shit dirtbag. And here he's going to say, he wants the guy dead. Then the guy turns up dead. Now he is going to investigate to determine who made the guy dead. Of course, who do you think he's going to come back with? Oh yeah, actually turns out I killed him. Nah.
So you think James Earl Ray was a Hoover patsy?
Oh, I have no idea. I wasn't there. And, like you, it makes sense to me that he probably pulled the trigger, but it's sort of like with Oswald. Was he really there by himself on his own? Just a nut job? I don't know. It just seems a little bit sketch to me.
Hey, you guys have to let us know. Give us some feedback. Do you want us to cover JFK's assassination? Because we could probably do a multi-parter on that one. That would be an interesting case to talk about. Well, back to the case. So you remember when Ray has previously been incarcerated, how that usually ends up, right? I mean, the guy, while he's incarcerated, he's only thinking about one thing.
Yeah, escape. He's what they would call slippery.
Right. So, of course, without surprise or failure, he tried to escape prison through a steam tunnel in 1971, and then he tried to cut a hole in the ceiling in February of 1972. Unfortunately for him, and fortunately for everyone else, neither attempt was successful. Meanwhile, over the course of a decade, Ray filed multiple appeals, which were considered by various courts at different levels and whatever. And nonetheless, each court found that Ray's constitutional rights were upheld and that he had received a fair trial. On June 10th, 1977, Ray did escape from prison using a makeshift ladder to scale a 14-foot high prison wall. But 3 days later, he was captured, and they added a year to his sentence, making the total a nice, even 100 years.
I don't understand a couple things here. One, why this guy didn't get executed in the first place. And number two, you're in Tennessee in the late 60s and early 70s. I could have swore you try to run from there. You just got lead in the back.
Yeah, I mean, I had lots of questions. Also, at this point in history, even before he gets imprisoned on any of this, he has tried to and has successfully escaped from prison. And then afterward, he tries twice. At what point do they not all right, this guy, we need to, Alcatraz or what? I mean, we got to come up with some way to keep him locked up better than where he can just throw a ladder up against a fence and climb over it. I mean, do better, right?
Right.
To your question about the death penalty, though, because I did kind of gloss over that. He had, if you remember, I said he had pled guilty. And part of the calculus there was that he avoided a jury trial and avoided the death sentence. So instead of facing a potential death sentence, that's why he was sentenced to that 99 years of imprisonment. So that's why he didn't end up with the death penalty. And, they could have chosen to go to trial and seek the death penalty, but they decided not to. And I'm sure for some folks that probably looks sketchy, and to others, that's just another day in the courthouse and, criminal prosecution. All right. So he gets that 100 years now instead of 99, which I'm not sure that really even matters or makes a difference. But then in August of 1978, Ray testified before the House Select Committee on Assassinations. I had referenced their report earlier. After careful review of the evidence on December 30th of 78, the committee reached the conclusion that Ray acted alone despite circumstantial evidence of a conspiracy. So even the committee's report noted that there was some circumstantial evidence that a conspiracy existed, but they felt that he acted alone. The House's conclusions didn't satisfy everyone. After meeting with Ray and his attorney, Reverends Jesse Jackson and James Lawson announced that they did not believe Ray was responsible for King's death. And I think we were talking before we started recording, you mentioned just by happenstance that you saw something about somebody else who didn't buy that there wasn't a conspiracy, right?
Oh, yeah, Judge Joe Brown. This is his neck of the woods.
Yeah, and so same kind of thing, right? He believed, I think you shared with me, he believed that there was some kind of conspiracy that went a lot higher than James Earl Ray. And then didn't you say you heard or read that he kind of voiced that because he had some involvement or whatever in the case?
Yeah, as I understood it, he was supposed to be presiding over one of the hearings, trials, something, whatever. And he expressed probably a lot more eloquently than I did. Not that, oh my gosh, this is the mob or the CIA or whatever, just that something ain't right here. There's got to be more than this dude. And he was, the case was reassigned to another judge.
Right. All right. Now I'm going to say something, and I need you and everybody listening to try really hard to find your surprise face. In November of 1979, Ray escaped from prison again. This time, he was captured when a guard spotted him crawling along the base of the prison wall under a camouflage blanket. All right, this guy, I give it to him, right? And this is part of it. He doesn't seem like he might not be like the sharpest crayon in the box, but he's like a Swiss Army knife. The guy, all these aliases, he's traveling the world, he's doing all this crazy stuff. He might have missed his calling or not been fit to be an army soldier, but it seems like he would have fit in great with the CIA.
He's persistent because he's dumb. He don't know no better.
Hey, you know what? Sometimes I'd take persistence over intelligence, but whatever. April 23rd, 1998, James Earl Ray died from kidney and liver disease at the age of 70. His liver failure was caused by hepatitis C that he had contracted from blood transfusions after being stabbed in prison.
Couldn't have happened to a nicer guy.
I was trying to imagine what you would say, and it was something along those lines. So
I still can't believe he didn't get shot in the back one of the many times he tried to escape. But I bet at least the wardens and the prison guards were relieved that they didn't have to try and keep him in anymore, because it sounds like keeping that guy from escaping was like trying to nail Jell-O to a wall.
Yeah. As recently as June 2000, the case is still being seriously reviewed. The United States Attorney General, Janet Reno, conducted a fourth investigation into Ray's appeal, but at that time in 2000, and again, this is after he's dead, she found no evidence of a conspiracy or reason to reopen the case.
That Janet Reno was a solid dude.
Can't take you seriously. Oh my gosh.
Let me acknowledge something you said earlier, because I don't want people to think I'm sitting here with my tinfoil hat on my head or anything like that. Just because I don't trust the government or anybody also means I don't trust the tinfoil hat wearing people either. But I do agree with what you're saying. It's sometimes the simplest explanation that there's just some goofball with a gun that sort of went out and popped somebody that means a whole lot to us. That's a big public figure. It just seems like it's easier for our brains to accept that some big conspiracy, it was the government, it was the mob and this and that and whatever. My opinion is that I don't necessarily turn off either approach just out of hand. Give me the facts and we'll figure out where they go for what it's worth.
Yeah, and I think in a case like this, it wouldn't be far-fetched. When you look at some of the things Hoover, your favorite guy, did, and you see that like this dude had this newspaper that told him where they had printed what hotel King was staying in, what room he was in. Is it the kind of thing that somebody who wants to see King assassinated identifies this guy as the kind of person who would be likely to do it, and then just starts kind of nudging, like in subtle ways that would not be traceable, like this newspaper shows up on his doorstep at the hotel he's staying at, and he reads it and sees that. And there's other things that are sort of fed that direction that aren't an explicit, hey, go kill this guy, but lead you to that place in your mind.
Right. Just push him. And that could be. And look, I'm not saying he might have been he definitely was a nut. We can tell that. And he might have just been out on his own to do this. And that was that. I wasn't there. I don't know. All I'm saying is I'm not going to say, okay, well, this is what happened because Hoover said so. I'm also not going to say, oh, well, the House Select Committee said so.
Yeah. No, that's good. And I agree 100,000%. The truth's probably somewhere in the middle of all that. And you're right. I wasn't there either. And I don't know for sure. I think it's safe to say this guy pulled the trigger. And I think it's safe to say this guy was clearly involved, and he certainly bore responsibility in Martin Luther King Jr.'s death, and that he was right to be punished for that. And were there other people who should have been punished? Maybe. I can't say there weren't. And at this point, I don't think there's definitive evidence one way or the other.
We'll probably never know. But beyond that, another question that stands is, how would the world be different had Dr. King survived until his natural time?
Yeah, Dr. King, on that point, he not only led the civil rights movement at a crucial and pivotal point in history, bringing about the Civil Rights Act and leading the charge in nonviolent protest by utilizing Gandhi's tactics blended with his poetic, if not hypnotic, sermons and speeches and Christian ideology, but he was also the youngest person to be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. His untimely early passing should remind us that life is so fragile that even a man as great and wise and impactful as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. could be stopped in an instant at the hands of a hateful man who didn't like what he had to say.
Martin Luther King dedicated his life to love and to justice between fellow human beings. He died in the cause of that effort.
Hey, thanks for hanging out with us on the Brothers in Crime podcast. Feedback and suggestions are always welcome. For links and resources related to this episode, please see the show notes or visit us at brothersincrimepodcast.com. We hope you'll save, subscribe, or bookmark us on your favorite podcast site and join us for the next episode.